Hey there, I'm Tim, and this is one of our classroom sessions on the book of Jonah. The story of Jonah and the whale might appear simple at first, but on a closer reading, there is way more going on here than first meets the eye. In this session, we're going to look at some of the literary techniques used by the story's author, and when modern readers like ourselves notice things like this, it can help us read this ancient text with brand new eyes. Let's take a look. Let's open up our translations of Jonah and just look at chapter 1. Tell me what you noticed about the word hurl. Hurl in chapter 1. I'm guessing, did everybody notice hurl? It's one of the most obvious repetitions. This is going to straight up take a volunteer. This is kind of putting yourself out there, but somebody tell me what you saw about the word hurl. You're all kind, safe people here.
So in verse 4, we have Yahweh hurling a great wind.
He's the first hurler.
Yeah. He's the first hurler.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, okay. Mm-hmm.
And we have down at 15, they're going to hurl Jonah into the sea.
Yep.
The sailors.
Mm-hmm. Good.
What?
Good.
Oh,
well, so let's pause.
The cargo gets hurled.
And then the cargo gets hurled. Yes. Okay, so let's start there. Who's the first hurler? Yahweh. And it's as if it sets a chain reaction of hurling going on in the chapter. And it's only the final hurl that ends up being the one who really ought to be hurled, right? It's kind of this with Jonah into the sea. It's like a domino effect. So Yahweh is the first hurler. And then you noted the hurling of the cargo. Yeah. So Yahweh hurls a wind, right, at the sea, causing the ship to go crazy. So they think the solution is hurl the cargo. So you have two hurlers now. Yahweh's hurling because of somebody causing a problem. Now, but who's affected by the hurling? Is it Jonah? Not yet. It's other people. Oh no. Now we have like innocent bystanders caught up in the drama. And so they actually end up imitating Yahweh, don't they? They hurl what they think is the problem. We're too heavy, right? So they hurl what they think is the problem. But is it the right thing to hurl? No. It's not the right thing to hurl. That's good. So then you notice at the end, eventually the real problem gets hurled. And it's them. It's the sailors hurling Jonah. Okay, that's good. There's a couple others. So Yahweh is the first. He hurls. We subtracted that. The sailors hurl. And then in verse 12, when Jonah's exposed, only when Jonah's caught does he say, hurl me. Yeah? And so then they end up hurling him into the sea. So it's a cascade of hurls. And the first hurling is of the one who's searching for Jonah. And then the sailors become kind of like these ignorant, innocent bystanders. Well, what are we supposed to hurl to save ourselves? And by hurling the cargo, it's almost like this is their livelihood. You know, they're basically, it's a lost trip now. But they're not hurling in the right place. They need to hurl somewhere else. So, and notice how, remember verse 4, opened a new scene? And then the last hurling happens near the end of the scene too. It's like a bookend. Mm-hmm. It's also a repeated theme. Even though the word hurl is only in chapter 1, it kind of unites that whole scene. But when Jonah speaks in his prayer, in verse 3, who does he say threw him into the waters? Yahweh. He says, you cast me. It's not the same, it's not hurl, but it's the same idea. So it's as if Jonah recognizes, even though the sailors were the one who did it, who started the chain reaction? It was Yahweh. So you can. So it's almost it's an awareness of the whole chain of hurlings in chapter 1 that Yahweh is the ultimate hurler. And so he just says, you cast me into the deep. See how that works? And it's just added depth. All of a sudden you realize, whoa, like someone's really put this scene together. So when I spot some other repeated words, I'm going to probably get some other payoff that way too. Talk to me about fear in chapter 1. Who wants to talk about fear and what you noticed?
Verse 5, the sailors feared because of the storm.
What are they responding to? Maybe that's the way to say it.
Respond to the storm.
The storm, yeah.
It seems like they're afraid they're going to go down.
Totally, yep. So they fear the storm, yep.
And then in verse 9, that's when Jonah says that he fears Yahweh Elohim. And then after he says that, verse 10, their response is, then the men feared a great fear.
Yes, yeah, right. Double repetition, yeah. That's a good example of what Buber was saying, the root word. So there's a verb, yare, and then the noun, fear, yir'ah. But when you look at it, it's the same. And it's great in English because we have a noun and a verb that are the same. So you can imitate it in English. Sorry, keep going.
And then verse 16, the same thing after the storm calms down, they feared a great fear, but now it's they feared Yahweh a great fear.
Okay, so let's similar progression we're going to be able to notice here. Who are the first people to fear? Sailors. The sailors. Jonah? No. No. Should he be the one who's really afraid? Yeah. So the first people to tune in to what's happening here. And notice they fear because of the storm, but do they discern? Does their fear lead them to discern something more than just a bad storm? What does their fear lead them to do? It leads them to cry out to the gods, the Elohim, which is just a generic title for deities. So each cried to his Elohim. It's like a shotgun approach, right? So you follow that one, you follow that. Let's all cry to all of the ones we can think of, and maybe we'll find the one. Okay, so they fear a deity. That's the first mention of fear. Notice the last mention of fear is also them fearing a deity. But is it a generic Elohim? No. It's Yahweh. Okay, so the beginning, and it's right, it's the frame of the chapter again. They fear the gods, now they fear Yahweh. And so those beginning and ending, framing fears, are matched by two instances of fearing in the middle of this scene. And there's a key transition that takes place, yeah? When they ask him the 4 questions, right, he only answers one of them, and then the rest of his answer doesn't respond to anything that they asked, right? So they say, what's your work? Where are you from? What's your country? From what people are you? I'm a Hebrew, and I fear Yahweh Elohim. Notice both the 2 divine titles there, the personal name and then the generic title of deity. I fear Yahweh Elohim of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. So there's a deep irony here between the sailors who actually fear and Jonah who says that he fears. But based on people's behavior, who actually fears? The sailors. So then it's an irony of Jonah should be the one who first tunes into what's happening here, but he's asleep. Right? So he's clueless. So the sailors know more than they ought to know, and you can see it in their fear. Jonah is contradicting what he says that he knows with his actions. And notice then the transition. He says he fears Yahweh Elohim, and what do the sailors do yet again that shows that they really are the ones in tune with what's going on? They fear a great fear. And then by the end of the story, they fear a great fear. Whom? Yahweh. So everyone, it's just like you can see each step of the narrative, it's contrasting Jonah with the sailors. So let's think about it this way. What we're talking about is thematic repetition in just one chapter or in one scene, in one literary unit. We're looking at a quilt piece where the word fear has been used 4 times. the beginning, middle, and end. And they're all playing off each other in a sequence. And the whole point is to create a contrast between the two characters. So some people fear, other people say that they fear, and that becomes a really rich way to talk. We're developing the character of Jonah through these contrasting fearings. So it's a way of the author. I mean, what you tell me, what is he beginning to show us about Jonah through this contrast technique? How are you experiencing it in your own words?
That there's this obedience to God from everything else except Jonah.
Yes.
That he fears only in word but not in actual action.
Yeah.
Everything else obeys. The sea, the
Yeah, totally.
sailors,
Yes.
but not Jonah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, well put. And are pagan sailors the kinds of people you expect to fear Yahweh? So obviously, it's not just that other people, it's that they're pagan sailors, like who you would never expect.
I think it's clear that that Jonah is the antithesis of what he should be as a prophet of God. And if we weren't sure of that from the very beginning where he runs away from what God tells him to do, we can see it here because he's oblivious or purposely oblivious. We don't totally know, being asleep. That as Cynthia said, everything else obeys and he purposely doesn't. So I think when it says that he fears Yahweh, I think that's a formality for him to say so. I don't feel like that's a heart issue with him, right? That's that he really fears and respects Yahweh, or he wouldn't be in this situation.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, so just notice how much is communicated by such a minimal technique. Right. We're just talking 4 words, right? He could have used other vocabulary. There's other vocabulary in Hebrew for being amazed or overwhelmed or scared. He uses the same 4 words, and all of a sudden Jonah's become a 3D complex character. And you're wondering about his motives and why he's saying what he's saying. And all the author's done is repeated 4 words. So maximal characterization through a very minimal technique. Welcome to biblical narrative. They do a lot through very, Robert Alter calls it the spare economy of biblical narrative. With just a few words. We're used to epic novels being fat and telling you way more than what you need to know. Whole chapters telling you about characters that are only going to feature in one scene or something. And biblical narrative's the opposite. They're doing a lot with a little, which means that everything matters. Every little thing matters. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that the 4 fears that we have in this first chapter, 3 of them are the sailors, and each time it's an evolution. They're first afraid of the storm, then they're afraid of sort of the situation that's seemed to have caused the storm, and now they're afraid of the one who is the originator of the first thing that they were afraid of. And then we have this one fear from Jonah, and I think it's sort of that same technique that you see a lot in the Gospel of John, where somebody says something that on one level is false, but is actually true in a way that they don't mean. So Jonah is afraid of Yahweh, but not in the way that he seems to be presenting it. He's actually afraid of Yahweh's character. We see that in the end of the story, that he's afraid of what Yahweh will do if he's obedient to this call.
Yeah, you got it.
And so it's true, but not how he means it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Double meaning. Yes, so let's just register that. There are multiple layers of meaning in what people say in this story. There's the surface meaning, then there's once I broaden it out through the whole, does he mean anything that he's saying? The first time he says anything. I'm not sure he even means what he says. Well, what does that mean for the rest of what he says? That's interesting. So once again, notice how much we're able to talk about from 4 words, right? That have been, it's a remarkable narrative technique. Yeah.
Your last statement about the dual meaning of a word. Fear is one of those words that people are either afraid of in the Bible or they are drawn to, right? Fear is the beginning of wisdom, we're told, right? But other people are like, no, 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 we're not to fear God. We're to have a relationship with them. So they don't see the harmony in even how the word can have dual purposes.
Yeah, that's good. The fear that the sailors have here is we're going to die. The gods are out to get us. That's a very different kind of fear than the fear of Yahweh. But notice they convert to the fear of Yahweh in that good sense by the end. Yeah, you can watch the evolution, the development of their fear. Correct. And then it begins this ironic question of, well, what kind of fear ought Jonah to have at this point? Maybe a little unhealthy fear wouldn't be so bad for him from time to time, because it might get him to do the right thing. To fear great here. Okay, we could do more, but you see how this works. Okay, so this is repetition within one quilt piece of the larger quilt piece that is the book of Jonah. Let's look at another technique where two scenes next to each other, or two sections next to each other, and repetition between adjacent sections. This is what you could call juxtaposition. So this has to do with word play, not just repetition of word roots, but word play. And so you won't necessarily notice this, but I'll point it out to you because it's awesome. How many of you notice going down? Down, 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 down. Okay, yes. So pretty in chapter 1. He goes down to Joppa, down into the ship, down in even further into the deepest part of the ship, and then he lays down, and they're all right close to each other. So Jonah's flight actually reaches its culminating point, at least for the moment here, with the bottom of the ship. Actually, this is good juxtaposition too, because that's not the deepest part of his descent yet, is it? Nope, he's going to go deeper by going down. Oh, actually, this worked great as juxtaposition. Okay, so we've got a whole bunch of downs in chapter 1, and then a down in chapter 2. So what this means is threading chapter 1 and 2 together is Jonah's descent into the realm of the dead, his descent into death. But it's an ironic descent, very unlike Moses' putting his life on the line, risking death. Here, he is descending intentionally into his own death. Yeah. So that's a way that all of a sudden chapters 1 and 2 become joined. And you see this, all his words and actions then become combined in this descent. However, this descent also fits into the first category of something that unites chapter 1, not in terms of the word descent, but in terms of a contrast with the sailors. And it's actually the last words of chapter 1. They vowed vows, which is also a connection with chapter 2. But I'll show it to you in English and Hebrew just so you can see it, because it's awesome. So all those going downs is the Hebrew word yarad. Yarad. Then when he goes down into the ship and falls asleep, the word fall asleep is a word play on the word go down, because it's formed from the same letters. Yeradam. So he yarads, 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 and yeradam. He goes down, he goes down, he goes down, and he falls asleep. So in Hebrew, it really works great. What the sailors are doing in the last sentence of chapter 1 is yidru nedarim. It's all the same letters, but reversed. Instead of yarad, it's yadar. The D and the R have swapped places. And instead, in contrast, so Jonah's going down is contrasted by their making vows. Jonah's sleep, yeradam, is contrasted by the noun vows, nedarim. Dude, welcome to how biblical authors love this stuff. They're doing it all of the time. And so you get another contrast. In contrast to Jonah entering spiritual and physical slumber, what are the sailors doing? Are they asleep? They're vowing their allegiance to Yahweh by the end of the chapter. So it's Jonah's descent is contrast. It's another contrast repetition, but it's by means of Hebrew wordplay. So I don't want to discourage you from reading the Bible in translations. Our translations are amazing, but they can't. There isn't a way for them to do this, to point this stuff out. This is where just a solid commentary that will pay attention to this kind of thing will do it. However, are they the only ones to make vows? No. Well, to say they make vows. Let's go back to our translation. Where else does the word vows appear? Yes, at the end of chapter 2. And once again, Jonah's offering some kind of thanks for being rescued. And he says, you know what I'm going to do when I get out of here? Go vow my allegiance to Yahweh who rescued me. Now, once again, notice the contrast. What are the sailors doing at the end of chapter 1? With their actions, they're actually making vows. What is Jonah doing with the vows at the end of chapter 2? He's saying he will make vows. Do I have a category for Jonah saying something, but the sailors actually being the ones who are doing it? Fear. So of course. But should I trust? Should I trust what he's saying? Is he actually going to go fulfill his vows? Do you see how that adds? Now that with the fear contrast, this vow contrast, what do I do with this? So notice the word vows right here in chapter 1 as a wordplay contrasts with down, and then as a repeated word link contrasts with Jonah's. It's doing double duty in relation to chapters 1 and 2. Okay, so let's just pause. These authors, this is amazing. Yeah. This is really remarkable. Yeah. And I, just putting on, in pastoral ministry, I always struggled to know how much of this to ever talk about. Like in the class, you can do it and draw charts and stuff like this, but it's very hard. However, I do think something happens when people begin to see the Bible as sophisticated and aesthetically beautiful. Yes. It really affects people, just like it affects us. And so think about what it would look like in ways that don't make you look pretentious and like you know more than you actually do, but in a way that's inviting people in. Think about it, because this can really create new motivation and excitement for people when they realize it's beautiful literature. It's a lot of other things too, but it's not less than really amazing literature. Okay, can we make just one more step in this sequence here? Okay, so repeated words can create a theme throughout a chapter. Repeated words can link chapters that are in sequence to each other. Repeated words can also link chapters at a distance from each other. And this one's actually fairly easy. How do chapters 1 and 3 begin? The word of the Lord came to Jonah. Arise, go, call out. So I'm just going to represent that by arise, ... So this relationship between chapters 1 and 3 are like, okay, attempt number 2, right? Attempt number 1, attempt number 2. And then right off the bat, I'm supposed to think about these two attempts in relationship to each other. Yeah. Who are the other characters Jonah relates to in each of chapters 1 and chapter 3? Who are the heathen that he meets, right? So we get the sailors. And who fills that slot here? It's the Ninevites. When the sailors tune in to what's going on 2 times, both the captain and the sailors, they say, Jonah, do something, say something, so we do not perish. So let us not perish. When the king makes his decree, let us call out to the Lord, repent of your ways, so that we do not perish. Who fears Yahweh in these stories? All of the wrong people, or all of the right people, and just Jonah's not in on the party. So are you tracking here? 1 and 3 are in a pretty clear relationship. They're parallel. They're not next to each other. So notice what the key words want you to do. This is hyperlinking. When I say the word hyperlinking, this is what I mean. Literary units, pieces of the quilt that are not next to each other, but that there's enough conspicuous repetition that I'm meant to join them as next to each other in my mind, to compare and contrast the relationships. Chapter 2 and chapter 4. Who are the main characters on the stage in chapter 2 and chapter 4? Just Yahweh and Jonah, in both. In both cases, Jonah's speech to Yahweh is called what? What does he do to Yahweh? It's the word pray. Yeah, he prays. Yep. So if 1 and 3 are compare contrast, 2 and 4 are they both? They compare and contrast, right? Can I take Jonah's words at face value in chapter 4? Can I take his words at face value in chapter 2? All of a sudden, you're thinking about 2 and 4 as if they're next to each other in your mind. So this is what biblical authors call symmetrical design. You could use letters and just say, this is an A, B structure. And in your mind, you're supposed to connect these. So welcome to the wonderful world of biblical quilt design. And it's all through repeated words. So this is the most important skill to learn in reading this literature. And the payoff is huge. And anybody can do it. Especially in what helps us to get a more literal translation that maps more closely word for word onto the Hebrew or Greek. So in English, the New American Standard, terrible English, wonderful study Bible, right, for this kind of thing. And there are other translations that work that way too. Let's just pause. We're going to continue this line of thought. So maybe we'll save question and comment for when we finish it in the next session. But this is a good place to kind of stop and do a brain break for the moment.